As an MMA fan, you're probably rolling your eyes right now, maybe even thinking I've completely lost it. But before you dismiss this as the wildest take of all time, just hear me out. In his prime, McGregor was a force of nature. He ran through the UFC like nobody before him, putting legends to sleep and calling his shots like a true mastermind. At his peak, it genuinely felt like nobody could stop him. But even the greatest have weaknesses, and believe it or not, there's one man, one unlikely warrior who had the perfect tools to exploit them. And that man is CM Punk. Yes, I said it. Stay with me. In MMA, we've seen some of the craziest upsets, fights that had no business going the way they did. Remember when Matt Serra shocked the world by knocking out GSP, or when Holly Holm destroyed Ronda Rousey? These were fights that nobody saw coming, yet they happened. Now, I'm about to throw in one more hypothetical fight that, if it had happened, would have sent shockwaves through the MMA world. CM Punk versus Conor McGregor. Now, I already know what you're thinking, but CM Punk sucks at MMA. And you know what? I won't argue with you on that. The guy's record speaks for itself. Before his wild leap into the UFC, CM Punk was a megastar in WWE, a guy who held the WWE Championship twice and the World Heavyweight Championship 3 times. He was one of the biggest names in professional wrestling, cutting legendary promos, putting on classic matches, and building a fan base that worshipped him. But in 2014, Punk did something nobody saw coming. He walked away from it all. At the peak of his fame, when he could have kept cashing in big time, he dropped the mic for good and left WWE behind. And if that wasn't shocking enough, what he did next was even crazier. He decided to try his hand at MMA. Now, Punk wasn't some lifelong martial artist. He wasn't a college wrestler. He wasn't a kickboxing champion. He had literally zero MMA experience. And to make things even more ridiculous, he was already in his late 30s. That's not exactly the age where you start learning how to fight professionally. It's the age where most fighters are either retiring or at least slowing down. So yeah, this move, it was the kind of decision you'd expect from someone who's completely glazed out. Some praised Punk's bravery, while others saw it as nothing more than a publicity stunt. In September 2016, Punk made his UFC debut. His opponent? Mickey Gall, a young fighter with a modest 2-0 record. On paper, it didn't seem like the most dangerous matchup. The crowd was electric, erupting as Punk made his way to the octagon. Fans who had followed his WWE career were hyped, hoping to witness a Cinderella story in the making. But reality had other plans. The fight wasn't just a loss, it was a massacre. In just 134 seconds, Gall took Punk down, rained some good blows on him, and locked in a submission that left the former pro wrestler with no choice but to tap. No steel chairs, no dramatic promos, no last-minute comebacks, just cold, hard MMA reality. But despite this, Punk wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. He chose to return for one more fight, stepping into the octagon against Mike Jackson in what would ultimately be his final MMA bout. If his first fight was a reality check, this one was a full-blown wake-up call. Taking place in his hometown of Chicago, you'd think the energy from the crowd might give him an edge. But from the opening bell, it was clear. Punk had no business being in the UFC. The fight was an absolute mess. And the funniest part? Both men were bad, but somehow Punk still managed to make Jackson look decent. He had no experience, no real technique, and no clue what he was doing. It was painful to watch. By the end of the fight, even Dana White had seen enough. He pulled the plug, making it clear that Punk wouldn't be fighting in the UFC again. And honestly, who could blame him? The man had heart, no doubt about it, but heart alone doesn't win fights. What made things even crazier was that Jackson, the guy who beat him, also got released after the fight because even he failed to finish Punk. Imagine that. You win, and you still get shown the door. So yeah, let's be real. CM Punk's time in the UFC was nothing to write home about. It wasn't the inspiring underdog story he had hoped for. Instead, it was a reminder that not everyone can just walk into the octagon and survive. Now, looking at that guy, CM Punk, the man who got schooled in 2 UFC fights, and saying he knocks out a prime Conor McGregor, yeah, I know, it sounds absolutely insane. I mean, we're talking about the same prime McGregor who ran through the featherweight division like a wrecking ball. The same McGregor who made Jose Aldo, one of the most dominant champions in UFC history, look like an amateur in 13 seconds. The same McGregor who picked Eddie Alvarez apart. So how in the world does this guy, CM Punk, a man whose MMA skills were barely enough to survive inside the octagon, last 10 seconds, let alone knock out a prime McGregor? Well, stick with me. You see, while Prime McGregor was unmatched in terms of skill and ability, there was one weakness that always followed him, his ego. And I'm not talking about just confidence or self-belief. No, McGregor had the kind of ego that made him absolutely certain he could walk through anyone, no matter who they were. Sometimes that confidence worked in his favor, but other times, it backfired badly. Take his first fight against Nate Diaz, for example. That was a fight McGregor was supposed to win. He was the featherweight king, riding high off knocking out Aldo in seconds, and Nate, he took the fight on short notice and had barely trained. Everyone expected McGregor to roll right through him, and honestly, he probably thought the same thing, but what happened? He got too comfortable, too reckless, started throwing everything into his shots like he was expecting an early knockout, and when Nate didn't go down, Conor panicked. Next thing you know, he's getting lit up on the feet, wobbled, and then choked out, just like that. Now, you see where I'm going with this. The thing with McGregor is that he adjusts to the level of his opponent. If McGregor had ever gotten a call from Dana White that he was to fight CM Punk, I'm 100% sure that instead of training, he'd just drink and party all the way to the day of the fight. On the other side, you'd have a motivated CM Punk who is bent on righting wrongs and willing to do anything to prove his worth in the octagon. Because while you might say McGregor is miles better than CM Punk in terms of skill, you can't say that about this guy's bravery and dedication. I mean, he was just a normal WWE wrestler who came into the UFC with little or no training to deal with real punches. He's gonna be fired up for what would be the biggest opportunity of his life. So basically, McGregor, coming off a string of dominant wins, sees CM Punk as a joke, an easy payday. He barely trains, parties nonstop, and walks into the fight with terrible conditioning and a cocky attitude. Meanwhile, Punk, knowing this is his one shot at redemption, trains like his life depends on it, focusing on an unorthodox but effective strategy. And then when the fight finally happens, McGregor is going to be too busy trolling that he forgets to do the most important thing in a fight: keep his guard up. Then it becomes a battle between a man who sees his opponent as a fluke and a man ready to do whatever it takes to get the win. McGregor, expecting a walkover, keeps his hands low and plays around, showboating and taunting. He throws flashy kicks, leans back, and barely respects Punk's striking. Instead of engaging seriously, he's smiling, talking, and trying to put on a highlight reel finish. But here's the twist. Punk knows McGregor is underestimating him, so instead of looking for takedowns, he commits to an awkward but relentless striking strategy. He's worked on a basic but powerful overhand right, something McGregor wouldn't expect from him. McGregor gets lazy with his head movement, drops his hands, and boom, Punk lands a wild looping overhand right to the temple. McGregor wobbles, not expecting that level of power. One open shot is all it takes, and trust me, if Punk gets that space for an open shot, he's sure going to take it. If McGregor came in unmotivated, underestimated Punk, and then maybe, just maybe, Punk could pull off the most shocking upset in MMA history,